In the 2011 documentary Urbanized, former Bogota mayor Enrique Peñalosa is quoted as saying, "An advanced city is not a place where the poor move about in cars, rather is where even the rich use public transportation." Joining us today is Richard Andreski, Bureau Chief for Public Transportation in the Connecticut Department of Transportation. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments.
Thanks for being here.
Matt, thanks for visiting with us.
First and foremost, buses have sort of a cachet in American culture. For many children, the bus is how you get to school. But then in a lot of Connecticut, after high school, a lot of people drop off bus service. You know, it's not the thing that adults do right here. But for a lot of blue-collar workers, especially low-income workers, it's a primary means of getting to work. What does a daily trip look like for the average bus rider? Are they getting on a bus in New Haven and going to work in New Haven? Are they coming from Hamden, New Haven? Are they coming from Bridgeport, New Haven? What's the dynamics?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that our public transportation system in Connecticut is very diverse. We have lots of services that we provide here at the DOT, bus and rail, and every year 84 million people use our public transportation system. I think what maybe a lot of folks don't know is about half of those riders annually are on the bus system. Mm-hmm. So 84 million, about roughly half or 42 million are riding our buses.
Yeah, you see the Metro North on the news a lot, but the buses are just as big.
Every bit as much of a workhorse for us as the rail system. Those customers are doing lots of different things, right? Many of them are going to jobs, commuting into cities, traditional sort of coming from the outer parts of the city to the downtown. But a lot of folks are using the bus system to get to medical appointments, to educational opportunities, lots of reasons. Matter of fact, only about a third of our ridership is a commutation ridership.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Just as a measure of how important buses are to the economy, what does the economy of Connecticut look like if buses disappear?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't like to see that scenario. For 42 million people who depend on that bus system would be without transportation. I think one of the important things to recognize is that we have a public transportation system because, first, not everyone can afford an automobile. Even today, with low-interest loans, not everyone is either creditworthy for an auto or wants to or can afford the expenses that come along with owning an auto. So the bus system is absolutely essential. It moves people to get to jobs, stimulates economic development. We could talk a little bit about that too, but economic development is a big part of why we have public transportation. It gets people to jobs, but also stimulates local community development.
Yeah, and I mentioned a little bit before that a lot of us kind of drop off in Connecticut after, we're done in school. Whereas in New York City and some of these places, everybody is taking public transportation. But in Connecticut, for instance, in an op-ed from the Middletown Press, Jim Cameron quoted one person as saying, "Towns that have bus service are towns that frankly have a lesser quality of people." Why is there a stigma around bus service, do you think?
Our bus customers are very fine people.
I agree.
They're people going to, again, taking courses who are working at businesses throughout the state. Stigma, I think it's what you know, right? If you're in your car every day, it's sort of that solitary experience on the highways. You might not really understand or appreciate what's happening on the public transportation system. I'm a rider. I ride public transportation once or twice a week. I wish I could do it more. But when I'm out there talking with customers, I learn quite a bit about why they use transit and how important it is to them. The stigma, I think the stigma is going away.
It's changing?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at sort of the much talk about the millennial generation, if you look at the young people have a preference for living in our cities.
Yeah.
They have a preference for traveling in some other way other than their own auto. So a lot of them are on public transportation. And that's frankly one of the reasons why we are thinking about the future and where we go from here.
So is there a part of what you do that is education of the populace, letting them know what's going on? Or is that an important aspect to changing attitudes, is letting people know that it's not just because you can't afford a car, it's because it's better, it's lets you work on the bus, or the train?
So we are in addition to the fare revenue that we collect, we are a taxpayer-funded service. We're mindful of sort of how much we spend on marketing. We don't have a marketing budget per se, but what we do is when we go to events and community forums, we always tell the story and why do we have public transportation? How's it working? How are we relevant to the state economy? It's interesting that public transportation is really thriving in so many respects. We look around the country, there's many communities and many states where public transportation is actually contracting, where bus ridership is declining. We're not seeing that here. We're seeing through investments in CT Fast Track, our new service between Hartford and Stores, we're seeing ridership gains, and that's extraordinary.
Is the gain just with the fast track? Like, if minus the fast track, is the rest of the bus system also gaining or holding steady?
Yeah, so it's a mixed story. Where we've made investments and improved frequency, we've seen ridership growth. Where we haven't really reevaluated the network, we're not seeing those gains. And so what that tells us is we need to go back. The next effort is really around New Haven and the New Haven bus system, and we're excited about the potential there. There's already a significant ridership in the New Haven system, and we think with some route restructuring, some increased frequency on some main routes, that we can drive ridership even higher.
So changing the routes, is there any sort of replacing the buses themselves or the technology? You know, people talk about GPS and be able to tell when the bus is coming. How does that all interplay?
So we've equipped now, we're just about completed, we've equipped our entire CT Transit bus system statewide with GPS devices. We've made those GPS data points available to third-party app developers. So there's a product, the most popular one is called Transit app. Transit app. You just go to the Google or Apple and download Transit app, and you can see in real time where your bus is relative to where you are, minutes to arrival. You can even pull up a map and see the bus on the map.
Is that specific to Connecticut, that app, or is that a company that's working with all different systems?
A lot of different systems around the country. The next evolution in that is integration of service information with ticketing and fares. So really a total customer experience where you have one product. We're working on that now.
So in the future, it might be like the Apple Pay sort of thing, or where you walk on a bus and your phone is your bus ticket. It's attached to your bank account or whatever.
That's the vision. Yeah, absolutely.
Carrying the card or change.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, what we find in fare systems is that years ago, it was the token in the fare box when you boarded. But now, what we're seeing around the country and what we're going to be doing here in Connecticut is giving people lots of options. If you want to buy your fare at a 7-Eleven off of the rack, you'll be able to do that. You can do that
almost like a gift card.
You can do that today, actually.
Like you get the $50 Applebee's card, you get the $50.
Yes.
Okay.
Late last year, we introduced that. It's the Go CT card. You can go into 7-Eleven carries at CVS. Go in, pick it up.
Statewide.
Most locations, yes.
Or at least in the urban areas where there are bus systems.
Precisely, yes. Yeah, right.
And that's just a partnership between DOT and the private. So when we introduced our CT Fast Track service, one of the things we recognized was that that fare system had to be modernized, and so we've been introducing new improvements over the last couple of years. Last year, we introduced this Go CT card. It's an account-based card, so you can go online and renew it, load funds. If you don't have a credit card, you can walk into a store, hand the clerk your card, and give them cash. Okay.
And they'll load the card for you.
That's a lot of great stuff. So you've mentioned a couple times the fast track. It's going between New Britain and Hartford, Buckland Hills, Stores Express to Yukon. The mall. What role do you mention where the younger generation? What do they play in the changing public perception of buses and public transit in general?
I think what you're seeing is that communities around the country that are thriving have a very strong public transportation system, one that's working, and that's why it's relevant. It's relevant first because it gets people to their jobs, into medical appointments, into education. But it's also important because it's really a way to attract people, right? People want to live near transit, makes getting around easier.
Transit-oriented development's a big
buzzword. It is, isn't it? Yeah. And what we're seeing in New Britain, for example, is and between New Britain and Hartford is over $200 million in private sector investment happening. I think the most
based around the fast track.
It really is, yeah. The most exciting example I find is in downtown New Britain. If you walk over to the CT Fast Track station, you'll see 4-story buildings rising up from a formerly vacant site. A whole new mixed-use development.
So retail on the first floor for fast track riders, get something to eat before they get on, and above it,
living space.
Living space. Okay.
Yeah.
So someone that wants to commute on the bus can live right there. And
it's pretty exciting, and it's great. As a matter of fact, I've only been in Connecticut 4 years, and just walking around New Britain over the last 4 years, I've seen this
like
new energy.
You're seeing the changes.
New energy, really. Yeah. And Mayor Stewart has been a champion of CT Fast Track. It's pretty exciting. Every time Mayor Stewart goes out and does a public event, you'll hear her talk about how CT Fast Track has played a role in the rebirth of New Britain.
And is that important in getting the message out there? Because our membership, local leaders, is the coordinating with them an important part of getting the things like Fast Track rolling?
So yes, absolutely. Those conversations with the communities, we are very responsive to the needs and wants of the communities. What we have to think about right now is we're sort of at a point where we've made a lot of investment in rail and bus service over the last few years. And there's a big question about transportation funding. That's not a question for me to answer, but there's more we can do. But we have to be mindful of the resources that are available, and the policymakers are going to decide
what the final number is for you.
Sure.
Recently, some of our staff was at an NLC conference in Denver, and in Denver, their big, old, beautiful train station, they've redeveloped it, and they've put in restaurants. I think there's even a hotel in it there. And there's been some talk with New Haven's Union Station, kind of putting in some of that stuff to what you're speaking of, making it not just a way to get to here, but a draw to the younger generations. What do you think about that?
It's exciting. I mean, Union Station, New Haven Union Station, and the other major stations along the New Haven line are some of the busiest stations in the United States outside of the major downtown hubs, and I think it's phenomenal, right? These are transportation assets. They have to work first as a transportation asset, but we recognize that they also have this community role, right, to provide these other services. And so what we're excited is about the sort of the upgrading of that customer experience in New Haven. We're happy to be working with the city of New Haven. I think what we want to see is how that station sort of gets developed along with the community around it, right?
The surrounding area.
So right now there's sort of lots of opportunity all around. The station has suffered sort of from being disconnected from the downtown. That was sort of the decisions on 50 years ago about
urban redevelopment.
Exactly. So reconnecting. The city's leading that. Reconnecting the downtown to the train station is going to be critically important. As is the development that takes place around that station.
I think going back, we were talking before about the perception of buses and stuff. Do you think part of that is tied to the kind of urban development of the 50s and 60s, where the idea was get workers in cars into work and then back out to the burbs as quickly as you can in your car? Do you think it's the legacy of that mindset that you don't want to live downtown, you want to live out there and go in and then get out?
I think for many years that was the focus. I mean, the one-way street network in downtown is emblematic of that. High volume. Let's push everybody in and out.
In New Haven, specifically, like the frontage road.
Oh, sure.
They come down on a neighborhood. Just to get.
Yep. And that and what we call our pulse point bus system, right? The buses come in, There's a transfer that occurs, and the buses go out again.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is, because commutation is no longer the primary role of bus, what we've seen is a need to provide more frequent all-day service, right? So the peak isn't as...
So it's not just 9 to 5, someone needs to get to the store in the middle of the day.
You got it. So having a more reliable, more frequent all-day bus service is really where we're going. And I think the other thing is changing consumer expectations. What you've seen with mobile devices, what you've seen with the emergence of Uber and Lyft, is that people have different expectations about how they get around. It's no longer sort of acceptable to wait an hour for a bus. If you have to, you do it. But
there's other options.
On demand is really the name of the game, and so that's the big evolution, or the big revolution in our transportation industry right now. What is the future of public transportation?
You can shop on your phone. You can watch your show on your phone.
Yes.
Why can't you get your bus on your phone?
Right.
Sort of idea. So we've talked about the economics and the generational perceptions. What about the environmental aspects of this? A bus full of people is a bus full of people that aren't driving individual cars and polluting. So what kind of impact can this have? What kind of numbers are we looking at in Connecticut?
Well, the first thing I'll say is we have more than 40 million people a year riding on these buses, right? Those are folks that are not in their vehicles. And we already have among the lowest carbon footprint, the lowest emissions per mile traveled than almost any other mode. We're going to, as we think about where we go from here, what we're thinking about is a future where we move towards an all-electric fleet. Right, we're not there yet. There's quite a bit of work to do till we get there, but the trends are clear. If you look at transportation, there's the electrification of all transportation. It's happening. And
this is happening now. There are systems out there that are.
So in California, there's quite a few systems that have a substantial portion of their fleet electric. The technology is not quite there yet, but
is that more like streetcar kind of things?
No, not only that, rubber tire buses.
Electric buses.
Yeah, just like we see electric vehicles on the road, private autos. Same thing. There's
Prius scaled up to a.
Yeah, well, even beyond Prius. So the old Prius was a hybrid. What we're talking about is battery electric.
So no gas, no
tailpipe,
fuels, no pollution.
No pollution. Oh well, and so we're thinking that long range. That's where we're headed.
10 years, 20 years.
Yeah, everyone has different thoughts on that. I think the thing to keep in mind is we have a fleet. The buses on average last anywhere between 12 and 15 years.
Okay.
So even if we declared next year that we were going in that direction, we would see, a sort of a phase out. And
as what is the state of the fleet in Connecticut?
Right now, our average bus age is 7 years. We have a fleet of 600 vehicles, and right now most of them are sort of modern diesel buses. Some of them are hybrids, but we're starting the planning now to think about how do we take that next step and start moving into the electric.
Yeah. They said 7 years about the average age. Is that kind of standard with other states? Is that?
Yeah, where
do we stack up?
Yeah, we're keeping pace. Basically, a state of good repair for our fleet.
Yeah.
If the average bus is somewhere around 13 to 14 years old.
Okay, that's kind of the standard lifespan for a public bus.
You want your average age to be midpoint or lower.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then they slowly through attrition, you replace them as they go.
Right. Yeah.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH LP 103.5 FM.
What would be the viability of a free bus line in some place like New Haven where buses are already highly utilized?
Yeah, believe it or not, we have a free bus line in downtown New Haven. It's not well marketed.
Okay.
It's the Green Bus. It runs between Union Station and around the Green downtown.
So people from the train to the buses
and between downtown points. It's really not well marketed or understood, and so I think it's a really valid question. If we have this service, obviously it's not well understood what it does. So we're thinking about how do we relaunch that and make it a more attractive service.
One thing that there's a lot of talk about in urban planning now, when we talk about less cars, more public transportation, is going as far in some downtown areas where they're closing off streets to cars entirely. Do you see that as a trend going into the future where it's public transportation and more space for bikes and pedestrians?
We call it complete streets, right?
Mhm.
That all users of the road are entitled to use that road. We sort of had the autofocus for many generations. That was the focus on the automobile. So yes, I think there's a movement in that direction. I know the city of New Haven is thinking about converting one-way streets to two-way streets. I think that's a phenomenal thing.
What's the benefits of two-way over one-way?
Well, first of all, it shortens your circulation around the downtown, right? Right now, if you have to sort of make a left, you might have to go up two blocks and up and around.
And therefore using more gas and more. Okay.
Yeah, and also our bus system, right? Our bus system can only use certain roads in certain directions. It makes understanding where to catch the bus a little more challenging. When you have a two-way pattern, you can have bus stops on opposing sides of the street. Yeah. It's a little more intuitive for customers.
I mean, we all come to streets, most of us think of streets as two-way things. Was the one-way street at some point in the past considered the way to go for planning out an urban area?
It was, yeah. I started my career in New Jersey, and same situation there. Lots of streets have been converted, and that was in the 1950s, early 60s.
Same urban renewal thing. That was the idea, was make them one way because they thought it was more efficient or something.
Well, keep in mind, in that era, most of the jobs were in downtowns. Right, we didn't have suburban office parks yet. We didn't have sort of these developments that were off the interstate. In many cases, the interstates didn't exist. So you had lots of volume coming into a city. Most of it was one-way traffic. Some of the people had left the cities for the suburbs, but the businesses hadn't. And so the idea was get everybody in as quickly as possible, and then at night when the shift was over, get everyone home.
So part of that is the goals that you're looking at, but part of that is also just the changing where people are living sort of thing. Like society is also changing. It's not just you're trying to change the way we do it, but people are naturally moving to more urban areas. Is that sort of what's the trend is?
Yeah. I traveled quite a bit, both professionally, but more personally. And my family and I took a road trip around the Midwest in late June. And we made lots of stops throughout the Midwest, Indianapolis and Columbus and Cincinnati. And it's phenomenal to see how these downtowns, which were sort of ghost towns for a long period of time, how vibrant they become. Yeah. A lot of new housing, a lot of new development, startup companies moving back to the downtowns. So I think that's starting to happen here in Connecticut too.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. Yeah. We're based in New Haven. We love it down there. So in that Middletown press that was not so glowing about the buses, and some other articles, they sort of go on the notion that buses run on subsidies and that roads don't. Can you dispel that?
I've been getting that question for 20 years since I started my career. And I'll start by saying that all of our transportation services and assets are subsidized. Right, the men and women that plow our roads every day are employees of the Connecticut Department of Transportation, and they're being paid for by taxpayers and by motorists and other revenue sources that put money into the transportation fund. That's true. Public transportation is public transportation for a reason. It's public because we collectively for generations have decided that it's been an important part of our transportation system. I'll go back to my earlier comment. Gets people to jobs and economic opportunity, but it takes folks off the road. It generates and stimulates economic development, and I think those are benefits that aren't often measured when people talk about the bottom line. Right? They're talking about sort of the money we put in, but not talking really about what we're getting out of that.
That's great stuff. What does the cost of running buses in Connecticut look like?
Well, it depends on what you mean by cost. I think typically when people ask that question, I think they want to know, what does the state government put into our bus system?
Mm-hmm.
And that number is about $190 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
But that number is, again, to provide all of those services that we've been talking
Mm-hmm.
about statewide. We also have to remember, right, the riders are also contributing something.
They're working, so that's generating.
Mm-hmm. They're generating revenue. And then the other thing that I mentioned, $200 million in private sector investment around transit, just on the CT fast track area.
Yeah.
And so those dollars are, generating property tax revenue for the communities.
They're building a building, which are then taxable for the communities.
There's employees of those businesses and the construction jobs that are being created. All of those things are sort of stimulating economic activity. So, I'll say you really need to look at the total picture to understand why it is that we spend the money on public transportation.
So back to the top of the show and getting a place where everyone takes public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to need changing a lot of minds, but it also seems like the inevitable last stop for where we're going in transportation. What does the future of Connecticut public transport look like? What projects are in the pipeline? And will everyone be really riding the buses in the not too distant future?
Yeah, so we're in a period of disruption for transportation in general. We're seeing, retail, journalism, education. A lot of sectors have been disrupted by technology, and we're seeing that in transportation now. So I mentioned electrification. We're seeing changes in consumer behaviors because of the availability of Uber and Lyft. I think in the future, the vision for public transportation is a system that's more responsive and flexible. What that could mean is in the future, you might be able to provide more sort of on-demand services in certain areas. Public transportation doesn't work in every area either. One thing we need to keep in mind is public transportation works best where there's density.
Yeah. And there's a lot of not dense towns in smaller towns. Yeah,
so certainly along the southwest coast between Fairfield County and New Haven, lots of density, lots of activity. There, public transportation can really work and thrive. Same thing in the Hartford area. So we got to keep in mind that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's where can we do better? And so the vision, I think, is to bring some of the lessons learned that we've seen on our CT Fast Track and Hartford Line projects. Frequency matters. The first thing I'll say is that when you have frequent transit service, it brings riders. People know they can count on it.
Show up and they'll be on and on their way quickly.
Absolutely, number one. Number two, information matters. Having information at your fingertips about where your bus is, how many minutes until it arrives, being able to pay for your fares in many different ways, whatever works best for you. Those are really important to the evolution of transit. And the third, I would say, is that the type of services that we provide are going to evolve. The traditional big bus on a fixed route may work in certain corridors, but probably in the future we're going to see more smaller vehicles running more frequently.
Are we talking maybe at some point about driverless technologies, that kind of stuff?
There's a lot of speculation about when that's coming. That's not
that in the future no one will own cars because you'll just pick up your phone and hit it, and a driverless car will show up and take you where you want to go, and then when you're done, it'll go off and take someone else somewhere.
Yeah. So I think technology is going to play an interesting role. What I don't believe is that we're ever going to be able to replace a larger transit vehicle in a high-performing corridor with Uber and Lyft services. Because when you look at the number of people that we carry on bus and then do the math and look at what that would require on single-occupant vehicles, it would be very substantial. It would create lots of traffic. Will they work? It certainly will work in certain markets, right? But I don't think it's a replacement for.
So that might replace a lot of people's cars, but it's not going to replace the buses and the trains.
Certainly not the trains, because the trains carry so many people
sheer volume
in a small space. As to the buses, there might be routes out there that don't perform so well, and that might be candidates for on-demand type service.
All sorts of interesting things coming down the pipe for transportation in Connecticut. Well,
I'd like to thank our guest, Bureau Chief Richard Andreski of the Department of Transportation. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WMHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer. Christopher Gilson is our producer. Larry Gross is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like. And stick around after this episode for the next installment of our CCM Chat series with Richard Johnson, Town Manager of Glastonbury.
I'm Claudia LaBelle, CCM's Communications Intern. Today we'll be visiting Glastonbury to speak with their town manager, Richard Johnson, about the former tank farm Riverfront Park.
Thank you for speaking with us.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
So can you tell us a little bit about what makes Riverfront Park special to Glastonbury?
I think the best way to explain is to go back to what I would say is the beginning. And the beginning is probably some 30 years ago. Glastonbury is very fortunate to be bordered on the west by about 9 miles of the Connecticut River. But much of our community is within the flood zone. And if you go back 30 years, actually go back 20 years, we really didn't own any land along the river. The town did not. And there were very few opportunities for access to the Connecticut River. So some 30 some odd years ago, we established a goal to provide access to the Connecticut River for our citizens. And interestingly, it started with access for our public safety personnel, fire and police, to get to issues on the river, and a boat launch. And for many years, the opportunities simply didn't present themselves. And starting in 1997, that changed. And between 1997 and 2009, we had the opportunity through 7 separate land acquisitions to acquire the land, which is now our Riverfront Park. The reason we focused on that land is because it's largely high and dry, and it is located just outside of the town center. And we had property owners that generally shared our vision for creating public access to the river. And as we all know, there's really something special about water, and people like to be near the river. And our goals were consistent with the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, our own Parks and Recreation Plan of Development, and our Plan of Conservation Development. So that's kind of the history of how we got to where we are, in part.
That's awesome. Seems like there's been a lot of changes. Can you give us a little bit of background about what the park used to be and how the town decided to turn the land into a park?
Sure. Picking up on the 7 land acquisitions, going back to 1997, we did not own any of the land that is now the Riverfront Park. And we really had our breakthrough. It was August of 1997. I remember it because I was involved from start to finish. We acquired our first major piece of riverfront property, 45 acres, which is right down off of Wells Street, and it forms in large part our Phase 1 park. Between 1997 and 2009, we acquired the first piece of property, then 6 additional parcels, anywhere from the 45 acres, which was the largest, to 0.89 acres, each parcel very important. As part of that, we've, on a tax foreclosure, acquired a 23-acre bulk oil storage and distribution facility where the barges would come up the Connecticut River, offload petroleum products. They'd be stored in the big tanks. People call it a tank farm very often, stored in the tanks, and that had deteriorated. And we acquired that site as one of the 7 land acquisitions. I think the property really can be best described in, say, 6 phases. First phase being the land acquisitions that allowed us to assemble about 126 acres of land with river frontage. Second, we worked with EPA and DEP and the voters to remove the tanks, the below ground piping, all the buildings, and completed the environmental remediation of the former tank farm. We then had, in part of the park, we had two pieces of property with a road down the middle, and we kept looking at that and looking at it. And finally, the light bulb went off and said, gee, those two pieces of property would be a lot better if we moved the road. So we had a project whereby we moved the road to the eastern side of the properties, bringing part of the site together. It took us a while to figure that out, but it was one of those eureka moments that you have all of a sudden, gee, why don't we move the road? The voters then supported a new community center, which we constructed largely on the site of the former road and in part where the contaminated site that we had remediated was. We followed that up with phase one of the Riverfront Park, which has athletic fields, a dog park, walking trails, pavilions. And that's really located mostly on the 45 acres that we started this with the land acquisition in 1997. We then went forward with phase two, which is the boathouse, the boat launch, children's playground, the basketball courts, the walking trails, the fountain, and those other improvements. And along the way, we, as part of the park, but to support the park, we constructed a trail and sidewalk network to link the riverfront with the downtown and with Glastonbury Boulevard, which is just north, because we knew that this was going to provide a significant relationship in support of our downtown business community and Glastonbury Boulevard. And so our sidewalk network was completed along the way, and that's worked. There's a very strong relationship between the downtown and our park. So about 6 phases.
The town has received 2 awards for the work that's been put into the park, the Community Partnership Program Excellence Award and the Innovation in Park Design Award. Can you tell us about the efforts that went into the creation of the park that resulted in these awards?
Sure. I'll start with ICMA. That was the Community Partnership Award. And I think really, given the history of the Riverfront Park, I can't think of a better way to describe it than community partnership. First, we had a shared vision for about 30 plus years, and we never really wavered from that vision. And the community consistently supported the concept of a Riverfront Park. Secondly, over the years in the various phases, the voters approved around $30 million over a series of, I think, 4 bond issues to support the cleanup, the community center phase 1 and phase 2. So a significant investment. We had a partnership with DEEP, both for funding and support of the cleanup in the park and with the EPA. We received, of the $30 million, about $7 to $8 million of state grants, federal grants, and of that, almost $1 million in community participation. Our youth sport groups contributed to the boathouse, they contributed to the lighted baseball field, and they contributed just in general ways to support the park. $1 million is a lot of money for youth groups to raise, and they did. We also had a gift catalog where anyone in the community could contribute to the park. They could buy a bench, they could just support the project in total. That generated about $100,000. So we had significant community partnerships, both supporting the project through our referenda and our continued vision, as well as actually raising money and supporting the project. So when we saw the ICMA category of community partnerships, we felt that this should be considered very strongly, and ICMA agreed with us. The second national award was through the National Recreation and Park Association, and that was for innovative park design. And there are a couple of items, in my opinion, that really contributed to that. First, the park provides opportunities, both passive and active, for a wide range of interests. There is a dog park that was largely constructed by volunteer fundraising and labor. We have the athletic fields. We have a lot of passive overlooks and areas where people can simply gather. We have a beautiful fountain area where at any given day, if you went down there right now, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of folks sitting down there just enjoying the river. There are terraces, there's historic preservation, there are basketball courts, and the children's playgrounds, and a whole host of activities. What's really interesting about the boathouse is the lower level supports our crew program. Members of the community want to store their kayaks and their sculls there. But we also added a second level, which is a banquet facility. And I think what's really different about that, or unique, is that the revenues from the banquet facility support the care and maintenance and operation of the Phase 2 project. There are no taxpayer dollars that go into the maintenance of the boathouse, of the playgrounds, of the overlooks, the boat launch. All the revenues that we receive support the staff and all the costs. Last year, we were about 112, 113% revenues as compared to costs. This year, we're about $50,000 to $60,000 ahead of that, and we've reduced our costs. So I think that's very unique in that the public is able to use the facility, they rent it, for a variety of activities, and all of those revenues support the park. Additionally, we run activities in the upper level throughout the year for just the general public. We'll have a December holiday program, we'll have a spring program, we have a variety of programs where the public can come in and use the upper level at no cost. So when we put all that together, along with being on the river, the NRPA agreed that it had a very nice design, and we're very proud of that.
With the park receiving so much recognition, do you see a bright future?
What's interesting about the park, we thought this, and it's really come to fruition. It really is a focal point of the community. I can't imagine it being better located. Obviously, it needed to be on the river, which is a good thing it is. But it's right outside of our downtown business community. As I mentioned earlier, we have the sidewalks. There is an outstanding relationship between the boathouse, the riverfront park, the activities there. We hold our summer music series there. We hold our annual Apple Fest. There are all sorts of activities that go on, and those activities move right up the road to the central business district. So if it's on a Saturday or Sunday or an afternoon, you're trying to get into Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or any of the other Subway or any of the other restaurants, there's usually a very long line of people that are coming and going from the park. Additionally, when we hold virtually every Friday, Saturday, from May through October, there's events in the upper level of the boathouse. Those people transition to our hotels and to our restaurants. So there's a wide range of opportunities. I think that the park absolutely has a bright future, and it already has achieved that. And for decades, residents of Glastonbury and others are going to be able to go to a program, play basketball, go to the children's playground with their children, or just sit and watch the river go by. The park is really, it's just a home run. And I think what's particularly interesting for those of us who lived it is to know from whence we came to where we are right now. And it's been a really interesting journey. And as we know, in communities, things can take time. And 22 years may seem like a long time, but it's relatively quick from that first land acquisition in August of '97 to where we are today.
That's great. Thank you for your time.
Sure. My pleasure.